Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us. This morning I'm going to talk to you about AWS and FME in relation to 2017. I'm joined by Claude Vessar, and he works on the FME Cloud team, and he's actually also the only AWS certified developer in the company as well.
Good morning.
So we're going to walk you through first probably 20 minutes, walk you through some slides and discuss more of an informal discussion around AWS, and then at the end we're going to open the floor up to some questions. And many thanks to those who've already actually written some questions in the survey that we sent out. So we can pull some of those questions up as well. So let's get started. We've been talking about AWS and FME for quite some years now. Mainly the reason is FME Cloud, one of the products we have, actually runs on Amazon Web Services. But we actually have shifted the focus for this webinar a little bit. We sent out the survey, and 71% of you actually said you're currently not using any AWS products. So we're going to do a little bit more of an introduction. This also does show us this chart, as we expect, the S3 service and the RDS service, which we'll talk about in a little minute. They are the most popular services, which is to be expected. What we're going to do first is, before we even start talking about FME, is talk about the key AWS services. So AWS is huge now, right? How many services are we up to?
Well, I think it's more than 50 right now.
Right, so over 50, and the thing is with Amazon Web Services is it's just targeting every single corporation and government entity out there, from local to federal to large corporations to gaming companies. So you need to basically understand which service is applicable just to yourselves. And these are the services we think you should really focus and know about. And with these services, you can do a huge amount in AWS. So probably from left to right is from importance, I'll say. Now, I know a few of you in the survey actually said, oh, you hate all the acronyms that come with Amazon. So we're going to give you a kind of dumbed down version here. So S3, second service, or one of the first services that came with Amazon. So it's a simple storage service. So in simple terms, this is where you're going to store what? Images?
Yeah, basically all files.
All files, right?
It's a file storage, and it's unlimited. So
it's unlimited, it's highly redundant, and you can store files all over the globe, close to you and in different regions, which I'll talk about in a minute. So customers we see, they're storing, logs, they're storing satellite imagery, they're storing imagery from drones, they're storing anything that doesn't belong in a database.
Exactly. And one important term we will talk about in coming minutes is buckets. So a bucket in S3, you can imagine, is kind of a root folder. Right. So, and a bucket can be in the region. Just keep that in mind. We'll go into more details later on.
And so then you put things in the bucket, and when you put them in the bucket, they have a URL.
Yes, exactly. And this URL can either be private or public, or you can create a temporary URL, so it's only valid for a certain amount of time, or you can even make it a website.
Right, exactly, so yeah.
A lot of possibilities what you can do with objects in S3.
So that's your file-based storage. Relational database service, or so-called RDS, this is a simple one to explain. So this is just your Oracle database, your SQL Server database, MySQL,
Maria, PostgreSQL.
PostgreSQL. So the two spatial ones
are PostGIS for
PostGIS, yeah,
is supported, and then I think SQL Server has also a spatial.
SQL Server, yeah, not Oracle, unfortunately. So this is Amazon take care of everything for you, right?
Yes, exactly. It's basically a hosted version from the software you can install yourself on your local server. And what they do, they make it super easy to launch advanced configuration. So let's say you need an automatic failover, so a master-slave configuration for your database. You just do that with one click. Or you want a read replica of your database. Well, just launch it in another region, and
Exactly,
it takes away a lot of work, basically.
You just worry about your schema and your data, essentially.
Exactly.
Which is what that's the cloud for you. You know, you're worrying about your business logic. DynamoDB. So this one is basically Amazon's NoSQL database. Mark did a very good webinar on NoSQL a couple of weeks ago, so I won't go into too much detail here, but this is where you're going to store your unstructured data. It's incredibly fast, it's scalable. I think we'll leave that really. It's worth looking at if you need a NoSQL database within the AWS world. So they're the three core kind of data services. As we shift to the right, these are kind of additional services you need to know about when you're in the AWS world. So the first one is SQS, the simple queuing service.
Yeah, and this is basically just a managed queuing service. So you can push any messages you want into that queue, and they're lasting there for a defined amount of time. I think the max is like 4 days. And you need to have a worker like basically pulling those messages down from the queue and react on it. And the great thing about SQS is it's like highly available. They guarantee you that you receive every message at least once, and now latest offers even like in order and only once. And
right. And the nice thing about SQS is it's integrated into all the other products. So when a file gets placed in S3, you can configure S3 to send a message to SQS.
Exactly. And
when a row gets added to DynamoDB, you can configure an SQS message.
Yeah.
So you can start to build, you can see data processing events. That's essentially what it enables with FME.
Yes, you can like combine different services together, and you don't need to have the capacity, for example, to process all S3 objects right away. You can process them later if it's not urgent.
Right, exactly, yeah. SNS, simple notification service. Again, this is a great one to understand and know about, and it complements SQS to an extent, doesn't it?
Yes, and it pretty much gives you an interface to push notifications to the anything pretty much. So what, you send a message to that SNS, and then you can configure in the backend what you want to do with that message.
Right.
One option is, for example, that you add it to SQS, or another option would be you send it out to 100 people via email, or you publish that message to a webhook.
Right.
And you can change that as you go. So
you keep that endpoint the same, and then you can switch out all the logic behind it, and the endpoint stays the same.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So that's powerful. It's a powerful messaging framework. Lambda is. We all got very excited about this a few years ago, and I don't think that was unfounded. This is an extremely powerful service, and it essentially allows serverless computing. And so what this essentially means is usually when you're running code, so Lambda supports Python, Java,
and Node.js.
So JavaScript. When you're deploying this code traditionally, you're going to need a web server, or you're going to need some way, to run and host the code. With Lambda, all you do is run the code. So you write the code and you run it. You don't have to worry about any of the infrastructure.
Yeah, like you have to imagine, like previously, if you wanted to have like a service constantly available, so an event can come in at any time, and you want to react by code, you needed to have a server running constantly, and you pay for that server just listening and idling.
Right.
But now what Lambda does, it's constantly available, but it's not really running, so you're not paying for it.
Right.
It just fires up when an event is coming in, and that event can, for example, be a new object on S3.
Right.
And then the code is executed and the server shuts down, and you pay per millisecond.
Right. So you can kind of use it to glue logic between all the different services and do things. When something happens over here, you can execute code to help you out somewhere else. An API gateway, I won't go too much into this detail. We did a webinar on API gateway last June, but this is if you want to create an API with zero code. So you're going to start putting a load of business logic into Amazon, maybe even into FME. If you want to create a nice public interface to that logic, really use API Gateway with Lambda. This is a service to look to as well, and quite a few customers are using this. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour of the 7 key services you should have in your head when using Amazon. Next, I just want to talk briefly about FME, the FME platform. So FME is comprised of 3 products: FME Desktop, FME Server, and FME Cloud. FME Server and FME Cloud are essentially the same product. All that's different is with FME Server, it's the hosted version that you install yourself. So it's the version you install yourself on premises usually, but you can also install in your private cloud. With FME Cloud, we manage and install and run and host the FME server for you. So what is FME Desktop and Server? Well, it's a platform for essentially enabling data integration and data transformation. So you can connect different formats, you can transform the data as you're moving it between these different formats, and FME Server and Cloud enable the automation component. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about FME now. This isn't an introduction to FME. There's a lot of resources available up on the website if you want to learn more about FME. And there's also some old webinars on AWS as well.
Yes, and if you're really interested, we offer also free training for FME.
Right, exactly, yeah, which is great. I think there's actually some training running now at the moment as well. So what this slide is meant to show is the relationship between FME Desktop and FME Server and Cloud in regards to interacting with the AWS services. So let's start in the middle. FME Desktop, it looks like this. It's your authoring tool. This is where you're going to build your workflows. So desktop, if you're just using FME Desktop, which is fine, you're going to read the data from AWS. You're going to process the data. So maybe you're pulling some satellite imagery down. You're then going to process that data. Maybe you're doing some georectification or something like that. And then once you're done, you can write that data back to AWS or wherever you want, on premises or Azure, wherever you really want to write the data to. So FME Desktop and the so-called engine is really the core IP. It's where you're going to do all of the hardcore processing. Server and Cloud kind of wrap around this engine, this processing logic, and they're there to it's for automation essentially. So here we can respond to events. So a message goes into the SQS queue. You want to run a job. If a file gets uploaded to S3, you can run a job. If a message comes in on SMS, you can run a job. So it's kind of enabling this event-driven workflows to hook FME into the AWS ecosystem essentially. And then we can also go out as well and start triggering events in the AWS world, because you do want to do that sometimes.
Yeah. And obviously that works also only one way, so you can only get data out of AWS, process it and store it local, or the other way, you have local data, you process it and put it to AWS, so right. You don't have to interconnect AWS with AWS.
Yeah, and so one thing I will mention is FME Cloud runs on Amazon Web Services. And that's very important because when you're working with data, especially as you start working with large volumes of data, you want to be as close to your data as possible. And FME Cloud, if you have it in the same region, you're going to get upwards of 60 megabytes a second between, say, S3 and the instance. You get very high performance network traffic. So now what we're going to talk about are the enhancements in FME 2017 that have gone into 2017 to improve the AWS transformers and readers and writers. So I'm just going to talk as if we have a little bit of prior knowledge of FME here. Apologies if you're completely new. The first thing we've added is region support. So you can see here now on this S3 transformer, and also the readers and writers, if they support regions, they have them. You can see we can connect to a specific region.
So a region, for those who are new to AWS, is like kind of, it's a bit more than a data center, but it's ultimately a geographic location around the world. I think there are now more than 12 or something.
Yeah,
I don't know how many.
Be all of them here.
Anyway, so basically all the services of AWS are ultimately duplicated in a region. But when you use AWS, you have to pick a region and say, let's say I'm picking the US East Coast, and I upload my data there, and then your data is only available there, and you have to manually replicate it to other regions. So S3 traditionally didn't have regions, but since a couple of years now, I think they added regions as well, that you can pick a bucket in a specific region.
Yeah.
And with 2017, we finally support that as well. So the performance should now be quite a bit better than to before.
Yeah, so choose your closest region, and then, yeah, now you can actually pick the region, so we don't proxy through USE, so we go straight to the region. The other thing you're going to see that you can use to increase performance if you're not close to your region is S3 acceleration. So this was added only a few months ago to AWS, and so this comes with a caveat. What it essentially is doing is using AWS's network CloudFront, I think it's called. So with S3 acceleration, you go to the closest AWS endpoint, and then they route you within their network,
yes,
right?
And yeah, it should improve the speed if you're not close to the bucket. But important to remember is like S3 acceleration will only work if you enable it on the bucket.
Right. And you're getting upwards. You can run tests, and I've had kind of 400% increases in speed if you're going to say Frankfurt from Canada. The other thing is it does cost money as well.
Yes, you pay a bit more for the data transfer.
But it's worth knowing about. We've also added body encoding support as well. So now if you can encode a file when you put it up on S3, and before we weren't honoring that. So now if you pull down a GeoJSON file that's encoded as JSON, FME automatically detects that. S3 uploader. So again, there's the same actually updates on here with regards to region. The other thing we've added is this request header here. So you can now set headers when you do the upload, which is great. You can type things in manually. We've hard-coded the most popular ones in here as well. The other thing we've added is named connection support. And this is just kind of, instead of entering your credentials on every single readers and writers, you can create one connection object and reuse it.
It's basically a password manager integrated in FME.
Right. If you're familiar with FME, we already had this for databases. So the SQS receiver, this is one of my favorite new features. Stop when message is found. So, sorry, stop when no message is found. So what this means is before we used to basically read an entire queue, didn't we? Or you had to define how many messages you want to read. Now you can just say FME connect to this SQS queue and read all of the messages in the queue and then stop.
Yes, and that is a great use case for that. For example, is if you know you get like at a certain point you get like a lot of messages and you want to process them in parallel. So you start like several FME engines and you say tell all of them like just process messages until you're done.
Yeah.
So all of them will just stop automatically and free up the engine again.
Yeah, it's a great. You couldn't do that before. So this is great. I think it kind of makes the persistent receiver redundant, where it sucks onto an engine and keeps it running all the time.
Well, yeah, it depends on your workflow. So there's still a valid workflow for that, but
yeah.
Yes, for batch processing, certainly.
It's good to spread it across engines. The other thing I just want to mention briefly is the DynamoDB reader and writer. I know this wasn't too popular in our survey, but we have made huge improvements to this year. And let's just say before, when you connected to DynamoDB, you had to read the entire table.
Which was a bit ridiculous because you could have millions and millions of records.
Right. So now you can define a secondary index, and then you can define query parameters and query sort keys. And all that's kind of very technical terminology, but all it really means is you can now extract a subset of the database.
Well, we're leveraging DynamoDB indexes, basically.
Exactly, yeah. So you can pull data out very, very efficiently from Dynamo now as well. Okay. So this is, let's move on. So I think this is one of my most favorite things, that's come out on AWS in the past few years, and it's not really to do with infrastructure, it's to do with data. And to me, this is truly amazing. Now, on AWS, in S3 buckets, and there's some databases, through their open source initiative, they're providing all of these data sets for free, fully accessible. So this is Landsat 8 and Sentinel-2. These are the main data sets. We're talking, terabytes of data here, and this is being updated as the satellite's flying overhead. It's turning up in these buckets only a few hours later. So that's amazing. There's a whole bunch of other formats we won't go into now. The ones that have a green tick we can read, and the ones that have a cross are actually to do with climate change models, and we can't read those yet, but we might add them. So So ask us if you would like to read next slide or next. But yeah, I mean, the thing you've got to worry about really is what are you going to do with all this data? Because there's so much data coming in. So really, if you want to start working with these data sets, you're going to have to do your processing in Amazon. And that's where FME Cloud comes in, and that's what we're going to look at now in the next section. Have you got anything else to add to that, Claude? I think that's...
No, I think you covered pretty much all.
Yeah, you can go on Amazon.com/earth and see them all there. They're adding new ones all the time. The terrain tiles is quite good as well. Global coverage of a DEM and very high resolution in America. So now we want to talk about a great story that one of our partners in the UK, Sterling Geo, have been working on this year. And this ties together everything we've been talking about here. This is all of the AWS services that we talked about they're using, and also they're using all the Landsat data as well, Landsat 8 data. So supported by the UK Space Agency, essentially Sterling Geo have been embarking on an innovative project to demonstrate the practical value of the Earth observation data. So how do you turn all of these terabytes of data on Landsat 8 into real information that people can use? So this app here is this is the most popular kind of use case they came up with. They came up with, I think up to 100 different use cases, and this one here was the most popular. And that is for local authorities in the UK, providing them with a map that shows their green land cover for their area. So you can go into this web map and you can not only in an instant see how that land cover looks now, you can historically look how the green space has changed. And it's using it by picking up the near-infrared light that plants give off when they photosynthesize. So you can pull that out of that band in the Landsat 8 data. So they wanted to provide this information in a web service, and because satellite data has been continuously gathered, and they didn't want to inundate users, they only wanted to notify users when new information, not data, became available. So they used AWS to do this, obviously, and they also used FME. So let's take a look at this diagram here. This is kind of their architecture diagram. So you can see on the left here, this is the Landsat data coming into S3 every few hours. And so what happens when the data goes into the S3 bucket?
S3 notifies SNS topic, and Sterling Geo created their own SQ and subscribed to that SNS topic. So every time a message from S3 was published to that SNS topic, they received a message in their queue.
Right, great, okay. So then they launched an FME Cloud instance, and the reason they used FME Cloud is firstly it's because it's close to the data, so it was in the correct region, and it really allowed a powerful server environment just to be stood up and used for the duration of prototyping. So they only had to pay for demonstrations, and it really enabled a completely no infrastructure solution. So what they did with FME, the first thing they did is, there's so much data coming in, right? But they're only interested in England, really. So what they did, the first thing they did is create a filter that looked at the metadata associated with the incoming satellite data, and they checked it for two things. One, is it in their location they want? If not, throw it away. Secondly, is the cloud cover too high? It's England, cloud cover's probably too high, so it's always grey there. That's why I left. So they can throw that away, So they're doing some kind of filtering before they send the data off for processing. Now, once they've done the filtering, FME then provides the data to a hexagon geospatial modeler. So how they do that? They're using SQS, right?
Yeah. So here you can see a great example how you connect two parts of an application with SQS.
Right.
And those two parts are pretty much decoupled but still connected. So what they use here is like basically a server cluster, and they use a tool called auto-scaling group, which provides automatically servers based on load.
Right.
And so based on the metric, I mean. And in this case, probably the metric was like how many messages are in the queue. So if there are a lot of messages in the queue, they will launch more server and then stop them if the queue is empty.
Right. And I think we could probably also do this NDVI calculation within FME as well, but they used Hexagon, which is a great example here. So once the NDVI image has been created, it gets put into an S3 bucket by the Hexagon product. And then again, FME kicks in here. So FME picks the data up, clips the NDVI image to the relevant administrative boundaries, classifies the data, turns it into vectors, and loads it into a PostGIS database. And then it calculates the relevant statistics, which are also put into PostGIS. So then they use also FME to, on top of the PostGIS database, to serve that GeoJSON out and JSON data to populate the web map. So that's what you're seeing here is GeoJSON, and all of the kind of dashboard elements are populated from JSON from the database as well. So that's the scenario for actually creating the web map. They also then had another scenario because several government agencies were actually interested in being notified when new satellite data was available for the region of interest. So slightly differently, you know, if it met a specific criteria, they wanted to be notified when the data became available. So this is a similar logic as before, using SQS, checking the data, and when the data matches business rules, using FME, we're sending notifications out via Slack, email, and the Slack message and the email message just has a link to the data on S3. So it's fully automated and it's leveraging all of the different pieces of AWS. Okay, so that was hopefully a good kind of whistle-stop tour of AWS. There's a lot going on there. So what we're going to do now, we've got 5-10 minutes left. We're going to open the floor up to some questions. So yeah, you can go in GoToMeeting on the right. Basically, just chat any questions you have, and we're going to read some out. So, firstly, will you have an FME cloud for Azure? So, the answer is there's a lot of Azure is catching up, right? As a cloud provider, there's no doubt Azure is catching AWS up. It's a very popular cloud service. This is definitely something we're looking at doing with regards to FME cloud. It is a relatively complex engineering job to do that, but it is on our roadmap. What I will say is if you want to run FME server in Azure, you can do that yourself and contact us because we might be able to work with you on the pricing model. So that is on our roadmap, and yeah, please talk to us. It's very, very easy to run FME server on Azure if you want to. So do it yourself.
Yeah, the next question is, does the S3 downloader support IAM role instead of using AWS secret keys? Good question. I actually don't know.
Good question. No, it doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
No, so that ticket is in our backlog, and we've had a few people ask for that. So I'm going to make a note there to add your ticket to the backlog. We do need to do a bit of work there. You have to look at an environment variable, and then it basically uses that.
Yes. So for people who don't know what the IAM role means, it's basically if you run within the AWS universe. You can, so you run on a server in AWS, you can give that server certain permissions, and if you execute, like, do API requests against AWS, the server will automatically authenticate. It's kind of magic.
Right, yeah. And people in GovCloud use this all the time because often they don't get the credentials.
Yes, we use it as well in FME Cloud a lot.
So the answer is hopefully one day, but we haven't added that yet. Can we use already created FMEW on AWS? Of course, yeah. So FME, the FME workspace that you create, you can just publish up to cloud or server running in your own private cloud and then just run that exactly the same. There's really no difference to AWS in terms of how FME server and the FME technology runs compared to on-premises. It's the same software.
Yes, like so to clarify again, like FME Cloud is pretty much FME server. So you can export from your local FME server the whole server and import it in FME Cloud and the other way around.
Right.
That will work.
Yeah. Will there be an FME desktop AMI available? I believe there already might be. We'll have to follow up on that with you. But yes, of course, if you want to, you can run. What's the Amazon service where you can actually kind of provision
the marketplace?
No, the Windows. You can run like a Windows server. Just
Amazon Workspaces.
Amazon Workspaces. Yeah, you can run FME on there as well.
The compression.
Okay, yeah. Which compression software do you normally use to zip the output data? So I believe this just uses the Java zip library.
Yeah, I mean FME itself can zip the data. So,
yeah.
So I'm not sure what library they use.
I think it's just the Java, whatever Java uses. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know there's other compression things like 7-zip and things like that, but I don't think we support
that. FME just supports just plain zip.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah, so it's the same questions about FME server, desktop AMIs. We're actually, for FME server, you can actually use Docker as well. There's a Docker image that you can deploy on AWS or Azure, and that makes it very, very easy. It's still early days, but it does work very, very well, actually. So Docker is essentially similar to an AMI, but it's much easier to use. Yeah, we'll send that out to you.
So the question was if there is a link to the Docker image.
Yeah, there is. If you go on the FME server downloads page, there's actually a link on there, but we'll send you a link after. We can try and post it now, actually. But so there's some other questions in the doc. One of the questions we had quite a bit before the webinar was to do with, why do I have to download the data to FME for processing? Can't I leave the data on S3? You have terabytes of data on an S3 bucket, but you have to pull it down. And the answer is you have to pull it down.
So you can imagine like S3 is kind of a network drive, but it's only accessible through the internet to a URL.
Right.
So the HTTP protocol is the access protocol. But even if you have your data on a network drive for processing, the data still gets pulled local into your memory. So FME, for example, if you process an FME, the data is loaded into memory, and so it's pulled from that network drive. So, but in that case, the file system kind of handles the transfer. So with S3, that's different because the HTTP protocol doesn't work as seamlessly.
Right.
So you have to download it from S3 first. But if the URL is public from S3, you can use, for most transformer now, I think, most readers, they support URLs directly as a data source.
It still pulls it down, though. I mean, you're always going to have to pull it down to process. The only time, probably looking forward in the future, where that might not happen is through EFS. Because EFS is essentially a way to mount a network drive against an instance, and you could mount one against multiple instances.
Yeah, and so the question is like, do we actually recommend the use of AWS EFS? And I don't know. I never used EFS until now, so I can't answer that question, but it looks very promising. So what I read in like forums in the early days, what they had problems with was like if you have a lot of small files, that they have performance issues, but it's good possible that they resolve that in between.
And so you really just mount that as an NFS drive against the instance, right? That's how it works.
Yes, I think it's pretty much just the NFS network drive.
So another question on a private cloud deployment as well. So, can you deploy FME server, the enterprise technology, in a private cloud deployment? And absolutely, yeah. And with FME Cloud, we just host that within our own infrastructure, within our virtual private cloud. You can't extend into your own. So if you want to run FME server in your own private cloud, you have to install and configure it yourself. And again, you can use Docker to manage that deployment. Yeah, it seems so. Let's have a look. To be able to, people are worried about cost in Amazon as well. Are we able to determine the price cost and know what really happens when we hit the quota? So this is in Amazon. I think you can set up. Can you set up alerts in Amazon?
Yes, they actually they have, first of all, they have a pricing alert. So you can set that you get an email or a notification otherwise when you hit that price. that price range. But they now also released a thing called budgets. So you can actually create budgets for your projected cloud costs.
Right.
I think I'm not sure what happens when you hit the budget, but they give quite a lot of tools to make sure you don't spend more than you actually should.
Right. Okay.
They also have like a thing called Trusted Advisor, which advises you on like how you can save money.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of tools out there to help you with that. Do you recommend the use of AWS Elastic Cache with S3?
Well, that depends on the workflow. I'm not quite sure what's the background behind that question, so it's kind of hard to answer. But there are certainly like workflows when you want to cache content, either metadata or actual content from S3, and
right.
have it available quickly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think if anyone has any more questions, we'll answer a few more off the survey that people sent in. One interesting one was around security and you know, when you get hacked, if you get hacked, when you get hacked, how open will you be about that? What's your contingency plan? So, you know, we do take security very seriously with the FME Cloud product. We know your data's on those instances, and we work with a CISSP certified professional every year to do a big vulnerability and audit, a security audit basically. So, you know, security is tight, but obviously, you know, things happen, and you know, we will be transparent. If there is an issue and someone gains access to your instance, we will immediately contact you, and we have triggers and alerts set up that go straight to our phones at the second we know anyone's breached and got SSH access to your instance, and we will be very reactive to that situation, and you know, we won't be trying to hide anything. So that's it. Hasn't happened yet, but that would be our message on that. Okay, well that's thanks a lot for joining us today. We had a good turnout. So with that, I think we're going to wrap things up. So thanks a lot, Claude. I'll actually have one more question. Is it possible to set up a license server on AWS? So yes, you could. I'm assuming you're referring to a license server for desktop licenses. With Server 2017 and 2016, I believe, they've changed the licensing, so you don't even need a license server. That's not a concern if you're using FME Server anymore. But with you could set up a FlexLM license server for desktop if you wished. You'd have to just provision a EC2 instance, probably a micro, install the software, and it's really just like having one on premises. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, they can contact us via email, and we'd be more than happy to help with you. Okay, thank you.